car reeked of that smell that was always there, but only flared up at the most inconvenient times. The ride home after tryouts for the school basketball team in 8th grade was one of those times. The back seats reminded me of a cheap motel. I started to feel sick in my stomach. I tried to think about what I'd had for lunch, maybe a cheeseburger, but all I could picture was rotten eggs, and the image only worsened the odor. I leaned against the door and closed my eyes, trying not to think of the stench. But it was no longer than 10 seconds before the jackhammer pounding against my skull of the bouncing along of my 2001 Lexus sedan down Boynton Beach Boulevard forced me to sit up straight. The old car smell returned with a vengeance. School started that day at the same place where it would end 8 hours later. Tryouts for the Somerset Academy middle school basketball team were later that afternoon. The basketball court was the pride and joy of the newly opened school. Even the rowdiest of 7th graders deferred to and respected the blue and concrete beauty. Thick white lines demarcated our heaven on earth. The outdoor court paralleled the student drop-off and pickup loop and stood adjacent to the outdoor tables where I'd spent most of my 3 years of middle school. Nowhere else would you see 12 and 13-year-olds not quite yet introduced to, or at least not yet addicted to, caffeine, so alive at 7:30 in the morning. Every AM we'd really play pickup games right up until the first bell. We played with the scrappiness of a walk-on, trying to prove his worth. Who knew the D1 coach was watching his every move, and who knew there was only one spot on the team. We showed off to the girls with the finesse of pros under the bright lights of an all-star game, who knew fans would fantasize over and try and replicate his every move. We argued vigorously for fouls like the clutch playmaker, who knew the fate of the team rested on his shoulders when only a few seconds and a point or two separated victory and defeat. I've been a little nervous the day before in anticipation of the tryout to come, but that morning that feeling gave way to something entirely worse. The previous day's minor stomach butterflies were replaced by those ugly, wormy insects that often preceded the pretty winged creatures in their metamorphosis. It felt as if dozens of little caterpillars were crawling around in my digestive system, gnawing on my internal organs and peppering my intestines with holes from which precious fluids necessary to life were seeping out. And with it, all of my will to live. The creepy crawlies inhabiting my viscera were debilitating enough for me to choose to sit out the traditional before school pickup, preferring a dark green bench table combo that faced the basketball court, much like a beach. I stared beyond the basketball court, thinking about the hours I'd spent shooting hoops in my driveway, hoping it'd all be enough. I held the table tight until I'd realized my fingers had turned pale, and I forced myself to let go. The devil spawn who'd taken up residence inside me slowly started to return to the depths of hell from which they came. I'd never known anxiousness to be so physically and emotionally draining. The school day was a blur, and it was more of a haze than usual since I didn't even recall Mr. Sorensen's geometry class whatsoever, when I usually remembered at least one or two of the many jokes that were made at our poor teacher's expense by either me or my boy Isaiah. "You excited for tryouts?" asked my best friend at the time, and partner in crime in Mr. Sorensen's eyes, just as class was starting. "Yeah, just a little nervous," I responded, mustering all of my strength to try my best not to clue him in to how much I was dreading the end of 7th period math and the ensuing tryouts. The hour and a half ended up being spent staring into space and occasionally at the silver nose hairs that so violently protruded from Mr. Sorensen's nostrils. Needless to say, I didn't learn anything about right triangles that day. Before long, though, I was standing on the cusp of paradise, the basketball court that was more a home to me than Mother Earth herself. I still play pickup games in my dreams there, every now and then, running up and down that world with the world within a world where nothing else mattered. I was good enough to make the team. I knew it then, now as I know it. Nonetheless, I couldn't get out of my head the idea of being rejected and kicked out of that place I called home. I was setting myself up for failure. I played through tryouts, and before long, my mom had come to pick me up. She was 30 minutes early. I didn't need to leave early. I knew my mom would wait until tryouts were over. Yet I told the coach I had to go anyways. I walked over to the silver Lexus that, although having grayed with a decade and a half in sunny South Florida, stuck out like a sore thumb against the blue and green basketball court in the foreground that seemed to glow as it basked in all the sun's glory that afternoon. I dragged my feet towards the car, while everyone else sprinted back and forth on the court behind me. I didn't dare look back, feeling as though I'd disgraced the place and the sport that had welcomed me unconditionally and with such open arms. I didn't need to leave early. I knew I could have finished the tryout, but I walked away anyway. For so long, I convinced myself that that half hour wouldn't have mattered, that my fate was sealed, and that the school basketball team wasn't for me. Worse than the coaches not believing in my skill and potential, I realize now it was I who had given up on myself and wrongly convinced myself that nothing I did mattered, that I just wasn't good enough. As I sat down in the car, the old leather sank and groaned that awful noise which could only be made by that 15-year-old leather that hosted hundreds of sweaty drives home from soccer and baseball practice, that had taken on a color that made one wonder whether the original seats were tan or cream or something else altogether. And that had been the backdrop of countless backseat breakfasts on the way to school and McDonald's on the way home from the dentist. Noticing the very obvious negative energy that exuded from me as I got in my car, my mom asked if I needed to stay to finish the tryouts and that she would wait in the car. I said no. Unconvinced, she asked me, "Are you sure?" With the disgust lingering in my throat from my evident failure on the court only moments ago, I responded curtly, "There's no point," in a voice that wasn't quite yelling but certainly didn't invite further conversation. Preoccupied by my overwhelming emotions, it was only then that I noticed the car smelled, more so than usual, of sweaty gym socks and rotten eggs. It was not a good day for the air conditioner to be broken. The 10-minute car ride home felt like an eternity. The cut list for the basketball team was posted the next day. The 8x10-inch white rectangle stood out against the Kelly green door, behind which was the classroom that served as the boys' locker room for the year. You could almost smell the intoxicating concoction of Axe and Old Spice body spray penetrate the 2-inch metal door. I thought back to the drive home the day before. I scanned the 14 solitary names that in no particular order determined my fate. I've been elbowing my way forward to get a better look at the paper, but by the time I made my third careful pass over the names on the list, I was the only one still looking. And it finally sunk in that I wasn't going to find my name there no matter how many times I looked. I turned away with resignation and stared ahead at the court that would come to haunt my dreams, and then up to the sky toward the gods that I seldom asked for help. Nor was I looking or asking for help this time either, more so asking aloud yet to myself, why me? Of all the people, why me? Only now do I see why me. I see that in telling myself throughout the day that I wasn't going to make the team by saying I needed to leave early. I've been handicapping myself. Knowing that the task was well within my grasp, but that failure would sting harder than anything else I'd ever dealt with, I stacked the odds against myself. I figured I couldn't blame myself for not succeeding at something that was next to impossible, right? The way I saw it, it was out of my hands. Rather than accepting the fact that there was a chance I might not succeed and nonetheless giving it my all, I resigned myself to failure by creating an excuse for me to say, oh well, I did what I could, but I guess it just can't be helped. I tried to make coming to terms with the result easier on myself, deflecting blame away from my own self. I thought dealing with failure would be easier if I construed what I was doing as harder than it was, if the odds seemed insurmountably unfavorable to me. Only in retrospect do I realize that trying to protect myself from getting hurt only ended up hurting me more than I ever would have been in the first place. I still struggle today with giving up at the first indications of hardship, but I've gotten better at catching myself getting in my own way. Even if I am destined to fail, I figure the least I could do is go through with it. At least that way I won't have to regret it years later. Not seeing my name as I scan the list, I picture myself being cast away by some divine creator, losing favor, being thrown aside as not good enough, deemed unworthy of his love. I saw myself as an angel whose wings had been clipped, falling to the depths of the underworld, who never again walk in that paradise on earth. Looking back at it, it's almost laughable to think how dramatic I was. But then again, when you're in middle school, everything feels like the end of the world. Middle school, hey.